as I was getting closer to junior, senior year in high school, starting to think about what we all have to think about. What's next? Where do I go from here? Am I going to university? Am I getting a job? What do I want? Where's it all leading? I began to think, what's the reality? What could I really do? My grades were not all that good. I didn't have the confidence in myself, combined with what I was going through, being bullied, being harassed since primary school. I think at age 16, 17, I'm just getting fed up with the nastiness of the world. But I was so driven and so sure that this is who I was and what I was, and that this is just how it is. I had no idea how to do this. So there was a lot of bottling up. There was a lot of dealing with it that way, getting rejected by all of the 300, 400 at least publishers, agents.
Hi, I'm your host, Reena Suri, and welcome to Thriving Changes. In this episode, Steven Fischer shares his journey from childhood passions to international success. You'll discover what shaped his storytelling and eventually his career in the creative field. Let's dive in. Welcome, Steven.
Hello, Reena. Well, thank you for letting me be here today.
I am so grateful for your time, and I'm really excited about this conversation. This is an industry that I've not explored. We've never had somebody from cartooning, from a background of cartooning and filmmaking. And so I'm really looking forward to this conversation, something new for me to learn and discover.
Oh, thank you. Me too.
Yeah. I've had several conversations with you prior to our recording, and they've been very enriching, and I've only grown in my curiosity. So I hope to bring that into this podcast and this be a continuing conversation of such wonderful conversations I've had with you, Stephen. And I would really like to bring some of those elements, especially how your discovery process of yourself as a creator. I was really fascinated with your thoughts around society and the values that we are creating or passing on within people, with our children, to the next generation, how we are impacting the society and what values are we promoting. And that was the conversation that I really want to dig into.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Reena. I enjoyed our conversations too. And isn't that what it's all about? Connecting, being together, sharing ideas, talking about life as we see it and where it's going and the stimulation of it all. These are obvious things to say, it sounds like, but how little we actually do of it, it seems like.
Absolutely. Yeah. So true. So how we do it is I invite my guests to share a little bit about themselves, and then we take the conversation forward there. So if you could just share a little background of what you do, what you currently do, and then we'll dig into the story of how you got there.
Well, I work as a writer, producer, director independently of cinema and television, cartoons, print cartoons, not so much these days, but I started as a print cartoonist, and that developed to working as a character animator, which evolved to doing what I do now, writing, producing, and directing both live action and animated movies.
Wow. All right. So where are you based? You're based in...
Well, my home is Baltimore, and my wife and I have a home in her home of Chicago, which is where I am at the moment.
All right. So, but your work takes you all over the world, right?
All over the world. Yeah. Europe, Asia primarily, but I've been fortunate to work all over the world.
Yeah. So tell me, was this always something that you wanted to do, or did you go through a discovery process?
The first cartoon book I produced, I was 6 years old.
Wow.
The love of cartooning and the love of immersing myself into a cartoon world goes straight back to childhood. I don't know exactly when, but I certainly, from family stories, knew I was drawing, as most kids do at age 4, 5, 6. But at 6 years old, I recreated a Peanuts story, Charlie Brown and Snoopy and Lucy, which were and are my go-to absolute favorite cartoon characters. And I still have it. It's what you would expect a 6-year-old to produce. But nonetheless, it was a little original story with those characters stapled together. And that has always been with me throughout childhood, teen years, and adult years, this connection to cartoons, storytelling, specifically in print cartoon. At age 14, two significant things happened. One, my parents, recognizing this interest that I had in cartooning, bought me a professional grade drawing board, the one I still use today, in fact. But as a 14-year-old, to receive professional equipment made me feel extra special. And it encouraged and influenced the interest and the need to keep creating, keep drawing. The second thing that happened, also recognizing this interest in cartooning, my parents enrolled my sister and I into a cartooning class that was being held at a community college on Saturday mornings. And I had never heard of anything like this before, and I was so excited to go. I was certain the person teaching this was going to be some big time cartoonist, because who else would teach a cartoon class? So, day one, I show up with all of the cartoons I had been producing just on my own for my own amusement. And part of that was a series of books, young reader books, minimal text, large, colorful pictures that were basically mocking young reader books and with my own cynical nature at the time. But nonetheless, a whole series of books in this thing that I was doing for my own amusement. But I brought them all, and it was not a big time cartoonist who was teaching. It was Mr. Bartran, who taught primary school during the week. And he's looking at these books and he says, "This is interesting. I read books like this, not as cynical as this, but books like this to my first graders. If I pay you," he says, "if I pay you, would you write and draw 2 books for me that I could read to my students?" And you can imagine a 14-year-old being offered money to do the thing he loves the most. I said yes immediately, got the instructions on whatever they were, a due date, a topic, theme, whatever it was, did the work, turned in the 2 books at the due date, was paid $5 each for one, $10. But that $10 was enough for me as a 14-year-old to justify myself as a professional cartoonist. I was being paid to provide a service. No doubt that had a huge impact in building confidence in maybe I've got something here, this thing I like to do. So I kept doing it. And that led to continuing to create and continuing to publicize the work.
What amazing parents to recognize and to encourage
Yeah.
you to take and to follow your heart and to discover what it might lead to. That's amazing. As parents, I think I needed to hear that so important to recognize the talents in your child and promote those rather than allow your own versions of success to influence or try to influence your child.
Yeah, I was very blessed in that regard to have an upbringing surrounded by love with parents who were supportive, were committed, were present, openly showed their love. A lot of hugs growing up, a lot of conversation, a lot of talk. Tell me what's on your mind, what's bothering you, kind of discussion. I was very fortunate in that regard.
That's so encouraging and so needed, especially in a
Yeah,
world today. Home should be your most safest place where you can come and share and download whatever is there in your heart
right.
and not be worried what they'll think or the direction that it might take, but rather just present and hear what's going on in your head.
Agreed.
So you started with cartooning, and so how did that evolve and where did it lead you, that journey?
Yeah, this is interesting because so much of my childhood was centered around sport and baseball specifically, but sports in general. It was, again, age 6, I started playing organized sport, being involved in organized sports for the community and then later for schools, high schools, junior high. And that was also something I enjoyed very much. And as I was getting closer to junior, senior year in high school, starting to think about what we all have to think about. What's next? Where do I go from here? Am I going to university? Am I getting a job? What do I want? Where's it all leading? I began to think, what's the reality? What could I really do? My grades were not all that good. So that the academic future was, from my perspective, always in jeopardy. And then sport, I knew I was good. I had ability. I certainly had talent. I knew it. I don't know that I had confidence that I could make a career professionally out of sport. Also in there was aviation. I was very interested in aviation, military aviation, that I pursued as a junior, senior, looking at ROTC programs. I knew I did not have the grades for any kind of academy. So all of that started to come into play with where I was at, where I wanted to go, and the reality of where I thought I could go. Sport and aviation were slowly fading away because I didn't have the confidence in myself I could do either professionally. So what next? Well, there's this cartooning thing. You seem to be good at that. That's in your life. Now that was combined with, for whatever reason, at age 17, having a certain, I don't want to call it an epiphany because there was no singular moment, but there, at age 16, 17, I noticed I was getting more and more frustrated and disappointed with what I was seeing in society, in the US, but in the world as well. What I was noting, what I was seeing as a society that had its priorities backwards, its values backwards. What I was seeing not only in the world in which I lived, and very much being bullied was present in my life, again starting at age 6 in primary school. A lot of things happen at age 6, but that was also a constant in my life. And I think at age 16, 17, I'm just getting fed up with the nastiness of the world. The fact that so many I was seeing in pop culture, in my own life, were so many people focusing on cynicism as opposed to trying to understand, focusing on violence as a means of solution to a problem, staying on the surface of life, never or very rarely digging deep to try to understand ourselves, why we feel the way we feel, why things have happened the way they happen. I don't know that I, as a 16-year-old, would ever articulate it this way, but that's what was going on. And to the point where I was so fed up with it that I started to do something about it. And for whatever reason, I went right back to the drawing board to do something about it and started creating stories that I felt were my response to what I was seeing, the backwards priorities and values of society. Doing this specifically for a young audience, beginning reader audiences. And my logic at that time was the older generation, being teenagers into adults, early adult, and older adults, already set in their ways, already have their habits and conditioning. The reality is you're probably not going to change those, but maybe starting at the very beginning, there's a chance to influence with certain morals and values and things that I wanted to talk about publicly, that I thought we as a human species should be focusing our priorities and values on. So before I was even out of high school, I was creating manuscripts, cartoon driven, talking about these things and sending them out to publishers, trying to get something published. And that all led to the discussion of graduations coming up. What are you going to do? What's the reality of what you could do? And it all started from that point, taking me into a direction of a career in the arts.
couple of things that I really want to touch on. This is something that is really close to my heart, and I love that value section that you're talking about. Could you name some of the values that you thought were backward, that people or the society had it all backwards? So,
Well,
which,
we were being programmed for a something from nothing existence, the quick and easy.
yeah,
Chopping carrots is too hard. It's too much effort. Here, let's use this device and make it easy and quick, which is fine. I'm all for convenience, but there's a programming that's happening as I saw it that was having its effect in so many other areas of life. The quick and easy solution, hostility over peaceful resolution to some sort of conflict, entertaining ourselves with violence, entertaining ourselves, seeing our society destroyed, cynicism over understanding, and all of the things that were, I felt, keeping us from progressing in a spiritual sense.
yeah, absolutely. Where did this wisdom, I can only call it that, where did it come from at such a young age? You were being so, this is for a 16-year-old to ask such powerful questions
Mm-hmm.
to himself. We don't hear that very often.
Mm-hmm.
And that self belief that you had in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
how did you? I'm wondering, one is, where did it come from? Second is, how did you safeguard it and
Mm.
not get
Right,
influenced?
right. Yeah. Yeah, I have no answer, Rena. I have no idea. That's how I was. That's who I was. In part, I was a lot of things, but that was certainly part of it. My influences, there was a spiritual element to it, a metaphysical introduction to that
Mhm.
way of thinking, that things happen for a reason and there's something bigger maybe than we are aware of going on in the world. I was being introduced to that philosophy and that mindset in my teenage years, maybe looking back even younger, but certainly consciously through my mother, who explored metaphysics and as a personal interest. To she had her own exploration to answer her own questions about life, about why things happen. And instinctively, I joined her in the journey. So we learned together. No doubt that had an impact, combined with what I was going through, being bullied, being harassed since primary school. My nature overall, in general, was, even as a child, more soft spoken, gentle, which from the adult perspective might be admirable. From the kid perspective, you're just a target. And
Yep.
I was very much targeted for that because most people, most kids knew I would not fight back. It was rare. It's very interesting on the playing field, on the soccer pitch or on the baseball diamond. I was just the opposite. I was very aggressive, but off the pitch, very soft spoken and the very opposite of hostile. And being vulnerable like that to attack and being attacked for so many years, I think just took its toll by 16, by 17. I'd had enough. And my response to it, for whatever reason, just working intuitively and instinctively, was to go within and reflect and retreat where I always would retreat, to the world of cartoons and storytelling, to find comfort and security, to have control. The world we create on a piece of paper gave me much more control over the existence than in this awake reality.
Was there any time that you felt bitter? Did you hold on anger?
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's probably still with me. Anger, very much anger, bitterness towards the injustice, the hypocrisy of society that I was seeing, and having all these ideas. Who at age 17, 18 doesn't believe they have all the answers and all the ideas. Well, I did too, and I was sharing them or trying to share them, but with every rejection from a publisher or a newspaper syndicate or what have you, the anger of I've got all these things I want to say, and I feel like I'm not being heard. That's very much part of it. My response to it was to live with it. So there was a lot of bottling up. There was a lot of dealing with it that way, but there was also a lot of release physical through physical exercise, whether running or sport or something else. In addition to the influence it had, no surprise, on the art that was being produced, the stories, the motivation for the creation of a new work.
Interestingly, just yesterday, I was listening to, it wasn't a podcast, it was an event, but he's a well known writer, a lyricist in India.
Hmm.
And his name is Javed Akhtar. I've heard him say this multiple times that cinema is a reflection of society.
Mm-hmm.
If you think they are going to make anything different, they're not. They're reflecting what the society is
Mm-hmm.
promoting. They
Mm-hmm.
will sell what people want to watch
Mm-hmm.
and what is a part of the society. And so, very important for us to recognize what values are we promoting. I've stopped watching web series. They're all
Mm-hmm.
violent. The language.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too how far back this kind of storytelling goes. How, in terms of violence, for example, you can look back how many thousands of years and still
Yeah.
see similarity in, at least in that kind of action oriented violence being a source of entertainment.
Yeah, I know. But then how are we evolving as human beings? That was the time when things were done in a certain way. Like there were wars. You had to take over land to become more powerful.
Yeah.
I guess we've evolved as human beings. And shouldn't our thinking also evolve and change? And rather than go back
Right.
to primitive times where we are attacking and still being stuck in that era, rather than evolving as
Well,
human beings.
yeah. Well, it's interesting what seems to carry over from generation to generation to generation. There's the human nature aspect of greed, jealousy, fear, all of these things that motivate so much of staying on the surface of life, as I see it anyway. And in addition to the bigger issues of all of the unaddressed, unresolved issues we all carry, that we, as I was seeing it and continue to see it, we don't seem to take the same amount of time to go within and address what is in us that is unaddressed and unresolved as we do outwardly venting and expressing and pointing fingers and blaming everything else and everyone else and medicating ourselves to not feel the pain that's coming from deep within, trying to communicate, I believe, something
Yeah.
to us, to ourselves, from our higher self to ourself. It's
To
hard to
your
talk
point.
about Rena because it's so complex and so complicated, and there's no one answer and there's no one thing to do, and it's so difficult to have conversations like this because of that. Because with every one thing that's said, there's 10 things to counter
And
it, and the complexity of it all. There isn't one reason why things
yeah.
are happening the way they're happening or we are the way we are, obviously. But nonetheless, for whatever reason, it was all coming full force at me at age 16, 17. And being a proactive person, I hopefully am a proactive person. My nature was, instead of sitting around moping about it or being bitter and withdrawing, was to take action with the strengths that I had. And at the time, I thought they were, or hoped they were, being a storyteller, being a
Yeah.
cartoonist, specifically storytelling through cartoon.
So, but then how did the movies happen and how did cinema happen but you were in London also for a while, right?
Well, it's interesting. I was, and there is an element of ambition and drive and passion that all maybe was there my whole life, but certainly started kicking in those later teenage years. I started out with these manuscripts for young reader books that were promoting morals and values as I saw them, going the traditional route and having no connection to anyone or anything in the entertainment industry, certainly not in cartoons or anything else for that matter. So I had no idea how to do this. I had a lot of support. I had parents who loved and did what they could to help think, all right, what do you need to do? You have got a manuscript. Maybe go to a publisher. How do you find a publisher? Let's find a reference book in a library. And oh, there's this book, there's this market book. It's got all these addresses. So you make all these discoveries, and felt my way through the process. And that led to sending all of these manuscripts I was creating to dozens upon dozens, into the hundreds of book publishers that were publishing young reader books, and agents as well, getting rejected by all of the 300, 400 at least publishers, agents. 3 wrote back showing interest, and two of them were major publishers. They were sent the manuscript and ultimately rejected the manuscript. Not to be outdone, I somehow got the idea of self-publishing. Probably somebody told me about it, and I started investigating that and looking around. How do you do that? Where do you go? What do you do? Research took me to some printers. I had an uncle who ran a printing press in Baltimore, my home where I was living at the time. And he was very generous in helping introduce me to how we might do this. And I showed him the manuscript, and he told me about printing and what it would take to make the manuscript into a book, and went through, got some numbers, and it was some astronomical number because I wanted hardcover and full color and all of these things. So that was disappointing. And I remember my uncle or somebody saying, well, if it was all black and white and paperback, now here's the numbers. And that was more doable for me to print my own print run of books. But I didn't want a paperback black and white book. I had this vision for hardcover, full color picture books. But I remembered Peanuts and Charlie Brown and Lucy and Snoopy and all of the paperback black and white books that collected the comic strip episodes that I loved so much, that influenced and inspired me so much. So I started thinking, well, I don't want to do a black and white soft cover picture book, but if I were to do a paperback black and white, maybe if I change things into a comic strip, then that would match whatever was going in me, feeling that would be acceptable as a work. So everything got revamped. Everything I was putting into the picture books went into this new production, this comic strip, starring the same characters who were in the book, the Stephen Bluey comedy team. And I started creating this comic strip, and now I realized I had a new product, and I started not only with this ambition of eventually collecting the episodes into a book, but I started going to newspaper syndicates, national, local, regional, everyone and everything. And I started pitching that, and found a local newspaper in Maryland that bought the series and paid me every week to deliver episodes that were published in their newspaper. By this point, I'm a senior in high school, in the last 6 months. And again, the kids reading the comic strip, seeing it in the newspaper, and getting a lot of support from them, classmates who would come up to me, repeating a gag that was in the newspaper, asking what's going to happen next, showing, maybe without even realizing it, unwittingly encouraging the part of me that was ambitious, and the ego that was saying, wow, then maybe I've got something here. This is great. I'm making people happy, making people laugh. That makes me feel good. So I keep doing it, and I kept going. And all of that, at this point, the London thing you're talking about, after graduating high school, had an opportunity to live in London with family that was there. So I took full advantage, because I was already full force going after comic strips, books, getting published, getting out into the world, or trying to. And now there was this opportunity out of nowhere to live in a capital of the world. So I took full advantage. By this point, by the time it happened, I just turned 19 and had a wonderful collection of newspaper comic strips that were published. They were collected into a book that I self-published. My uncle and I found a way, and I put all my life savings in it. So I had 500 copies of this collection of comic strips that sold very well because, again, just feeling my way through, not knowing how to do this, I just worked logically. I've got a book, I've self-published it, I have to promote it. What do? Well, call up a newspaper, call up a TV station, go to a bookstore locally, try to hawk it. And a lot of the newspapers, was there radio and TV? Maybe not, but newspapers were picking it up in the state of Maryland and playing up on, here's this, at the time I was 18 when the book came out, here's this 18-year-old doing something positive and constructive, and let's support the kid. And the public did. I printed 500 within 3 months. 400 were sold.
Wow.
And many of them because they were responding to the newspaper articles. One of the articles published a post office box I had for a company that I had set up to publish the book. And the letters that were coming in with checks were referencing these news articles saying, I like what you're doing, I want to support you. Bookstores were coming, elementary schools were calling, all local in Maryland, to have me come in. The book did very well in those 3 months. And with all of that, of course, comes a bit of ego and confidence, especially when you're 18, that I took with me to England. I enrolled in the London Cartoon Center, and I studied there while I was for 3 years in London. I was studying at this center, but also pounding the pavement, taking full advantage of being in a capital of the world, going to newspaper syndicates with the comic strip, publishers with manuscripts I had, and production companies and TV stations with a version of the comic strip I adapted on paper into an animated TV series, inspired completely by Peanuts and Charles Schulz, going from comic strip to animated TV specials. So thinking in those terms, I started going in that direction. And that's where, this is a very long-winded answer to your question about where movies and cinema and television come in. That's where it comes in.
And you also got mentored by Bill Melendez's son also, right?
Correct. As in London, again, just thinking logically how to do this, because I had no connection to anything and anyone in television, let alone in newspaper, comic strips, or book publishing. So logically figuring out how to do this, I went to a library in Uxbridge, just outside of London, near where I was living, and began doing research of production companies and TV networks in the area to try to find the addresses or phone numbers to call or show up. And I would go and I would get a list of all the production companies, find out their address, and just go. And I would knock on the door and introduce myself. And I have an idea for a TV show. Can I talk to somebody? I didn't know what else to do. But I had somewhere in me, I had the confidence to do that, which is bizarre to think about in retrospect. But there was a fearlessness that was somewhere coming out. It hadn't come out before, but or if it did, I didn't recognize it. But I was so driven and so sure that this is who I was and what I was, and that this is just how it is. This is what I do. I'm a working artist and I'm publishing my work, or trying to. As I'm doing that, or like the first 6 months, 6 months into it, my time in the UK, I come upon a listing for Bill Melendez Productions. And I knew this name because of Charlie Brown and my love of Peanuts, and of course all of the Charlie Brown TV specials, the Charlie Brown Christmas, the Halloween special, all the feature films throughout the 60s and 70s, which I grew up on, as so many did, which inspired me to no end. So I knew the name Bill Melendez, Lee Mendelson, Charles Schultz, of course. But now here's Bill Melendez right in front of my face. I got so excited. They're headquartered in Los Angeles, but all of a sudden I'm discovering they have a European division, and it's right in London. So I write down the address, the phone number, I make a call. There's the call. What timing? And I book an appointment. And I say, my name is Steven Fischer. I've got this idea for an animated TV show. Can I talk to somebody about producing it? And somebody there said, yeah, come on in. So I show up. And at this point, I'm 19, and I've got my book, my comic strips, and a lot of chutzpah. And I show up, and there is not Bill Melendez, but Steve Melendez, Bill's son, who very much has been part of the Peanuts animated television show production as an editor and now as a producer. He is very generous. I'm 19. He's probably 40, early 40s. Takes me in, listens to my pitch and reads, sees what I have. The very first thing, the first meeting we had, he takes me to a pub. He says, let's get out of here. And we go across the street to a pub. He buys me a Coca-Cola. He's got wine. And he says, all right, tell me about this. And I start telling him, introducing ourselves to each other. And I do this comic strip and these books, and I want to make movies and this, that, and the other. Through that social aspect, and that was my first lesson in the professional world of production, the social aspect, to get to know people, to build relationships with the people you are interested in working with, and have that as the core to going into a production. From that and further conversations we had, Steve took a liking to the work that I had, to me personally, saw potential, saw opportunity, and brought me in under his wing for the next several years, but certainly for the next immediate 3 years. We intensely worked together, and I became part of that studio developing the Steve and Bluey TV animated show. And that was probably my biggest lesson in how to be a producer, how to write, how to direct. Just being in that studio environment, observing the animators who were there, the producers who were there, the work that was being done. And then in addition to the work we were doing on my own project, developing it, pitching it, Steve was and is the best mentor. He would guide me and share with me what to do in developing our idea, but he would let me do the work. He had all of the connections. He had a little black book at NBC, at ABC, at BBC, at all of the major networks, all the major distributors, but he would not, unless it was a special circumstance, do the work for me. He would say, here's who you need to talk to. This is the acquisitions director. This is so-and-so. You make the call. You're the producer. You knock on the door. You make the pitch. I am here in support. But having me do these things was my journeyman experience. And this was me in training and developing. And I got hooked. I got bit by the bug. I got bit by the bug with the publication of the comic strip as well in the book. It was just feeding me. It was like a drug that I needed more. And the only antidote was more production.
It comes out in your very being. You're so passionate about it. It comes out. It's fun watching you. You take off.
Thank you, Rena.
But what a mentor. The way he mentored you to really encourage you to go out and do it, because that's the only way that
Right.
you can learn.
Right.
To put you out there, and you're there as in the background supporting. What a mentor, and such a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Of course, and now you moved on from cartooning and you're into full-time creating cinema, right?
Yeah, it's quite a busy time. I served as co-producer on a feature film that released a couple of years ago in Europe. It's a movie called Life and Deaths of Max Linder, produced by Edward Porumni. I served as one of, I think we have 12 12 or 13 producers on this production, but it's a feature film dramatizing the life of Max Linder, who's an old French silent film star. So we're continuing to promote that. I'm finishing a rock and roll movie that I directed about a rock band called The Goods, who are based in South Florida and were active from 1989 to 99. And the movie that I was asked to make is a traditional, straightforward documentary about the band, but it's very experimental and arty. I'm producing a series of educational videos right now for McGraw-Hill, higher education. Those are always so much fun because you're always learning something new. And I'm getting ready to go back into production in Japan on a cartoon book we do every year in partnership with the University of Tokyo in an initiative that is part academic and part production, learning the art of cartooning with whoever is showing up for the production, but also producing original works that are driven by something very personal to the individual artist, a question that keeps them up at night or a personal pain that they have that they could use as a prompt for a new story, ultimately a work of fiction, but nonetheless a new comic book style story that then gets collected into a book that gets published, not publicly, but the participants can use as a keepsake or a portfolio piece that the host organization can use for marketing the interesting programs that they support. It is it's a busy time on all the fronts:
Yeah.
cinema, video production, print cartoons.
Yeah, and I know just recently what you just said about what the work that you're doing in Japan. My last guest, Ian Ziskin, he did something similar. Like what you talk, the concept, I guess, is similar. So he used grief because he went through two personal losses. One was his brother, and then his mother. Within a span of 6 months, he lost two very close connections. But then how he used that to develop what impact it had on his leadership.
Yeah.
And then he wrote a book and he invited other authors to share their journey through loss and how it impacted leadership.
Wow.
So
Well, it's rough what they're going through, but how wonderful that they're able to
there,
do something
it
constructive and
yes,
productive and artful as a way
yes,
of responding. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's terrific. All it's interesting. All of this goes full circle to this 18-year-old, 17-year-old who ultimately just wanted to use the arts to contribute something positive to society. And it's
exactly,
interesting how these things evolve and manifest themselves
I was
because
coming to that.
yeah, because that's exactly what I'm doing now that I realize it's the exact same battle cry that I launched as a 17-year-old, but in a kind of different way. It's not the full color hardcover picture book for beginning readers that I originally thought it would be. And maybe one day it will be, but it's something else, you know. It's a feature film in Europe, it's a cartoon initiative that I do in Japan and all over the world. We've done this throughout Europe, all over North America, all throughout Asia, using storytelling to address either our personal pain or some other pain that we're seeing. It's interesting. In Hungary, we've done it a couple of times. Most recently, in 2023, with an initiative supported by the city of Debrecen and the University of Debrecen on the eastern portion of the country, with artists from Tunisia, Myanmar, Russia, Kurdistan, Hungary, of course, addressing specifically what it was like for each of them through war, through the pandemic, through civil unrest, using that as a prompt for the cartoons that we created that the city used to promote tourism and the activities, the programs that the city supports, that the university is using to promote international students to come to their school and be involved in unique programming that the school supports, like this cartoon production.
Yeah.
So art and cartooning and social response and morals and values and this, that, and the other thing all coming together in essentially a new way from what I had envisioned years ago.
When you talk about manifestation and envisioning, did it just happen organically with you, or did you discover it through conversations and you intentionally? did certain practices to
Mhm.
make it stronger?
The only conscious effort is probably in response to the study in spirituality and metaphysics and everything else. So it was studying different religions as well and piecing things together that I saw as it related to my own personal situation and what I was going through and what I wanted ultimately. And somehow through all of that came this idea of the energy that connects us all and how we might use that energy to combine thinking what we want, envisioning what we want, combined with work, going out into the world, making things happen, knocking on doors, surviving rejection, being tenacious, and somehow all of that with whatever else is going on, leading to this thing called manifestation. For example, at age 19, I'm working with Steve Melendez in London on my own a proposal for my own animated TV show. And without having any sale yet, any indication that this production was going to see the light of day, I wrote my acceptance speech for an Emmy Award because I knew I would need it. And that is part of it. I realized that it's not just believing, but there's a knowing. And I could never articulate this to you at age 19. I just instinctively knew that this is what I am. I'm a working international artist and I've got my own productions and they're going out into the world. And I had something in my past to back that up, that the books I made at 14 that were commissioned, the comic strip, this, that, and the other. So there's that falling into it, in addition to whatever ego or confidence or whatever you want to call it. And then realizing through intention, envisioning, working, doing, planning, getting out into the world, knocking on doors, seeing the results of that incrementally in small ways. Things happen that gave me pause, like 2001, 8 years, 7 years from when I wrote that Emmy Award speech. I found myself at the Emmy Awards nominated, not for the Stephen Bluey animated show, which ultimately never got commissioned, although it did end up on television in a different way, in a different market, but for something else that I had produced. That was live action and something else, but nonetheless, there I am at the awards with I still have the speech I wrote. I took it with me. I didn't get to use it. I didn't win, but I was nominated. And it made me think a little more seriously about the combination of affirmation, physical doing, working, and how all of that combined with knowing and a belief and feeling it, knowing I was a working international successful artist in the pit of my existence. It was feeling, it was knowing it, and how all of that merged together to actually manifest something either exactly what I envisioned or close to it.
That feeling bit is so important. You have to really feel it to push you forward. That gut sense of, you have to be there. You have to think of yourself that yes, I'm worthy of it. I already have it, and then
Yeah.
it comes
Well,
to life.
right. And I have no answer to this. I do not know, and I do not claim to be any expert on this, but I believe it, and I believe it's true, and I believe it's real, and I believe it does happen, just because that's one example of several things that have happened to me in this journey. But that bit about knowing and feeling and believing, I've found to be a crucial part of it. Just having, it's not even faking it till you make it. I hate that expression because an intelligent audience will always be able to spot a fraud. And if you're faking something, it's going to show. But if you are it, and are it to the point where you are behaving the way you see yourself in the future. You're behaving as a working professional international artist. What does that mean? Well, it means a lot of things if you think about it. There's certain habits, there's conditioning, there's mindset, there's activity, there's your way of approaching the work you do, how you express yourself, how you present yourself on a phone call where you're calling somebody cold and saying, I'm so and so, and I've got this idea for a movie. How you present, the energy that is not something you're forcing into it, but that you are naturally releasing. Because I am Steven Fischer, I'm a producer. This is what we're doing. We've got this story. Here's what it is. And here's what we think it can do for the world. And we want you to be involved. Would you be interested? There is a difference that it somehow makes, and somehow it all connects.
It does. It makes a huge difference.
Mm.
And come to think of it, Stephen, if let's say if you're aiming towards it, if you don't show certain behavioral aspects of it, people will not even take you seriously.
Mm.
They start taking you seriously because you're displaying certain behavior, certain characteristics that reflects in your conversations, in the way you present yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It starts showing.
Yeah.
And it's that zeal that it's coming from within, but then people are able to see that, like how I just said, that it just shows in your energy, the passion, it's reflecting.
Mm-hmm.
So people see that, and people can then get connected to it. It works both ways. If I'm not training myself to be that in the person that I envision myself to
Mm-hmm.
be, then I'm not going to ever reach there. Just thoughts are not going to make me get there. I have to physically train myself as well, work towards it. Like you said, that they all follow, right? It's the drive, the ego, the belief, the
Mm-hmm.
feeling, but then discipline, hard work, persistence.
Yeah.
So it's a
Yeah. Agreed.
combination of so many several things. But
Agreed.
I guess it starts from there. If you don't feel it, if I don't feel it, I'm not going to really work towards it.
Right.
If I,
Well, that begs the question, how do you feel it? That's the hardest thing.
yeah, how did you manage to do it?
I have no idea.
I guess you just found the thing that you loved. For
Yeah,
me, that's what is
Rena.
reflecting.
Yeah, I think you got it. That's a big part of it. What do you love? What
Yeah.
are you passionate about? And this is not a new thing to say, but I don't know that there is anything new anymore. This has been out there. It's just a
Yes.
matter of remembering it, recognizing it, and acting on it. But I agree with you 1,000%. What do you love? What are you passionate about? Head in that direction. See where it takes you.
Yeah.
I think part of it too is having that connection with our instincts, our intuition, our self, our higher self, and recognizing the answers, I believe, are in us of
Yeah.
what to do, how to be, where to go. It's just a matter of, as you're talking about, conditioning that habit of going within, reflecting,
Yeah.
making connections between all of the memories and feelings that are emerging through that inquiry, and deciding for ourselves what that means, how to
No,
interpret it.
absolutely. What an interesting conversation. I just loved it. Let me ask you this. What advice would you like to give to someone who is confused or not knowing what to do? How can they go and seek within?
Mm. Can you share more? Confused in what way?
In let's say a career path that they want to take, or I guess I want to speak to the younger generations who are still looking or exploring which direction to take.
Mm.
So what would be your advice to them?
Well, the first thing that's coming to mind is to reiterate what we were just talking about. What do you love? And starting with that to at least prompt a conversation or exploration, which leads to the next thing we were talking about of the value of going within, of reflection, and doing whatever it takes to learn how to do that, whether it's through meditation or study or books that you can find on the subject, and then ultimately practicing meditation or going within, reflecting. There's so many exercises, writing exercises that are out there in a
Yeah.
simple online search to prompt that kind of reflection of who we are, why we do what we do, why things are happening the way they happen, what I want, how to determine the path I want. But it starts, I believe, with one, love what you're passionate about, and also what you don't want. That's a big part, identifying that, and then ultimately just going within and reflecting and conditioning that habit with the understanding that maybe the answer is not going to come right away and probably won't. It takes time. And having that acceptance and understanding that life takes time. And that's not a bad thing. That's why we're here. We have all this time to work through things and find things and recognize that the answer changes and evolves as we change and evolve over time.
Oh,
That's normal and natural.
that is so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for your time. This has
Mm.
been wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome, Rena. Thank you so much for letting me be here today.
Of course. My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure.